"You're nothing but a burden to me." Those words echoed in Emma's head as she stood in the doorway, her hands still gripping the doorknob. She had heard them before, countless times, but never like this. Never in front of everyone. Her father, John, had always been hard on her, but it was always in private, always behind closed doors. The words stung, but today, they were different. They were in front of her mother, Clara, and Clara said nothing. The silence between them felt like a weight, heavier than anything Emma had felt in years. For 18 years, she had lived in the shadows of her father's cruelty, and for 18 years, her mother had turned a blind eye. Now, as Emma stood there, all she could do was walk away. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She just walked away, quietly, as if nothing had happened. But inside, her heart was breaking. The only thing that kept her from collapsing right there in the hallway was the thought of what she would do next. Her father had always thought he had the upper hand. He thought he could control her, break her down, and make her feel worthless. But he didn't know her. He didn't know the strength that had been building inside her all these years. She had learned to keep her pain hidden, to bury it deep inside. But now it was time for that pain to surface. She was done being the victim, done being the silent, obedient daughter who took the hits without question. Today, at his ceremony, everything would change. She didn't know how yet, but she would make sure her father would regret every word he ever said to her. She would make sure her mother saw the truth, even if it meant tearing their family apart. She wasn't afraid anymore. She had spent so many years living in fear of him, but not anymore. Today was her day. She would stand tall. She would show them both what it meant to truly hurt, to truly suffer, to truly break free from the chains they had wrapped around her all her life. And when it was over, she would finally be free. Emma sat in the small living room, the silence enveloping her like a thick fog. The room, once filled with laughter and conversation, now felt hollow, empty. Her eyes wandered over the worn furniture, the old pictures on the walls, moments frozen in time, before everything changed. Before she became a prisoner in her own home. Her father's words echoed in her mind again, his cruel tone, the way he made her feel so small. "You're nothing but a burden." She clenched her fists, trying to push the memories away, but they kept coming, relentless. Her mother, Clara, had always been there, but never truly there. She had watched the abuse for years, choosing to remain silent, telling herself she didn't know how to help. But Emma knew better. She knew her mother had seen it all. The look in Clara's eyes, the way she flinched when John raised his voice, spoke volumes. Clara's silence wasn't ignorance, it was fear. Emma's heart ached at the thought. She had always hoped, deep down, that one day her mother would stand up for her, would protect her from the man who was supposed to love her. But that day never came. Now, as she sat in the same room that had witnessed so many painful moments, she realized something. It was too late for hope. It was time to act. She had spent too many years hiding in the shadows of her father's cruelty, too many years pretending everything was fine. But now, she couldn't do it anymore. She was done pretending. She was done being the invisible daughter, the one who suffered in silence while everyone else carried on as if nothing was wrong. Today, at her father's ceremony, things would be different. She would stand tall, not as the scared little girl who had been beaten down, but as a woman who had finally found her voice. A woman who would no longer be silenced. Emma stood up slowly, her legs a little shaky but her resolve firm. She walked over to the window, looking out at the world beyond. It felt strange, like she was stepping out of one life and into another. The past had shaped her, but it would not define her. Not anymore. She turned away from the window, her mind made up. She wasn't going to let her father's memory haunt her any longer. She would take control of her life, no matter what it took. She would make sure that everyone at the ceremony knew the truth. She would no longer be a victim. It was time for Emma to reclaim her power. Emma walked to the ceremony, her heart pounding in her chest. She could hear the muffled sounds of people talking, the quiet hum of conversation, but everything felt distant, almost surreal. She had never imagined that her father's funeral would be the place where she finally stood up for herself. It felt like a twisted irony, but there was no turning back now. As she entered the room, she saw Clara, sitting at the front, her eyes puffy from crying, her face etched with the sadness of losing her husband. Emma couldn't help but feel a strange emptiness as she looked at her mother. Clara had always been the emotional one, always the one who cared more about appearances than the truth. But Emma knew better. She had seen the cracks in the facade for years. She had seen how Clara would sit in silence, pretending to be unaware of the cruelty that had gone on behind closed doors. Today, Emma was determined to make her mother see the truth. She wasn't sure how she would do it yet, but she knew she had to make a statement. As the service began, Emma stood at the back, watching as people filed into their seats, offering their condolences, saying their goodbyes. She could see the sympathy in their eyes, but it all felt so hollow to her. These were the same people who had never spoken up, never questioned the way her father had treated her. They were just as complicit in the silence as Clara had been. The ceremony droned on, but Emma's mind was elsewhere. Her eyes kept drifting to her father's casket, and she could feel the weight of everything she had carried for so long pressing down on her chest. She had been afraid of this day for so many years. Afraid of seeing her father one last time, of confronting the man who had been her abuser. But now, she felt nothing. The anger, the fear, the hurt, they were all gone. In their place, there was a strange sense of calm, of peace. She wasn't going to let this man have any more control over her. As the final prayers were said and people began to file out of the room, Emma moved toward the front. She took a deep breath and walked up to the podium, where a few people were giving eulogies. She knew this was her moment. This was when she would finally speak her truth. She waited until the last eulogy was finished, and then, with all eyes on her, Emma stood up. Her voice was steady, even though her heart was racing. "I've spent my whole life being silent," she began, her words cutting through the air. "I've spent my whole life letting other people's opinions and expectations dictate my worth. But not anymore." She paused, her eyes scanning the room. "I'm done being quiet. I'm done pretending that everything was okay. And I'm done pretending that my father was the man everyone thought he was." The room fell silent, the weight of her words sinking in. Emma looked directly at Clara, who had turned pale, her hand trembling as she reached for a tissue. "I know what you've been doing, Mom," Emma continued, her voice low but filled with conviction. "I know you've been pretending, but the truth is, you saw everything. You knew what was going on, and you did nothing." The words hung in the air like a heavy fog. Clara's face twisted in shock, and Emma could see the guilt wash over her mother's face. For the first time, Emma saw something real in Clara's eyes, remorse. Emma didn't feel vindicated. She didn't feel like she had won. But she knew she had finally taken the first step toward reclaiming her life. She wasn't the scared little girl anymore. She was a woman who had found her voice. She had taken control of her story, and no one, not even her own mother, could take that away from her. The room was still, the soft hum of murmurs fading into a distant background as Emma stood there, her words still hanging in the air like a heavy fog. She felt the weight of the silence, the eyes of every person in the room fixed on her, waiting for something more. Clara's face was pale, her hand still shaking as she dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, but Emma could see the truth in her mother's eyes now. She knew, deep down, that her mother had been complicit all these years. But the truth wasn't something Emma had to force out anymore. It had been buried for too long, and now it was finally rising to the surface. Clara opened her mouth, but no words came out. The guilt was written all over her face, but Emma wasn't interested in hearing excuses. She wasn't interested in hearing how her mother had tried to rationalize her silence. It was too late for that. Emma's gaze softened as she looked at her mother. She was done with the anger, done with the frustration. All she wanted now was the truth, and it was time for her mother to face it. She stepped closer to the front of the room, her heels clicking softly against the wooden floor as the other guests watched with bated breath. "I don't need an apology," Emma said, her voice firm, but calm. "I don't need you to explain yourself anymore. I just need you to understand something. I'm not that scared little girl anymore. The one you let him break. I've grown. I've learned how to survive. And I'm done being silent." Her mother's eyes welled up with tears as she took a step forward, but Emma held up a hand, stopping her. "No," Emma continued. "I don't need your pity. I don't need your tears. What I need is for you to see me. Really see me, and understand that I've been carrying this burden for so long. And I can't carry it alone anymore." The room was still. Emma could feel her heart pounding in her chest, but she didn't flinch. This was the moment. The one she had been waiting for. The moment where everything changed. Clara reached out tentatively, her voice trembling. "Emma, I didn't know. I didn't know what to do." Emma's heart clenched, but she didn't let it show. You didn't want to know, she said, her voice steady. It was easier for you to pretend, to keep quiet. But that was your choice, wasn't it? Clara lowered her head, the weight of Emma's words crashing down on her. Emma could feel the tears rising in her own eyes, but she fought them back. She wasn't going to cry. Not now. Not here. I've spent my whole life thinking I needed you to protect me. But I realize now, I've always had to protect myself, Emma said quietly, the room still hanging on her every word. She turned to face the rest of the room, the guests who had been silent through it all. This is my story, and I'm done letting anyone control it. Not him. Not her. Not anyone. She took a deep breath, feeling the tension in her shoulders ease slightly as she stood tall. Her father might be gone, but the chains he had wrapped around her all her life were finally broken. She was free. Finally free. Emma stood outside the small chapel, the evening air cool against her skin as she tried to steady her breath. The ceremony had ended, but the weight of everything that had transpired still clung to her. She had done it. She had finally spoken her truth, but the relief she expected didn't come. Instead, there was a hollow emptiness inside her. It was as if the moment she had been waiting for had passed, leaving her standing there, uncertain of what came next. She leaned against the stone wall, her thoughts swirling. The guests had all filtered out, murmuring amongst themselves, and now only the quiet remained. Clara, her mother, had stayed behind, and Emma knew she would have to face her. But she wasn't ready. She wasn't ready for the apology she knew would come. She wasn't ready to hear her mother tell her that she was sorry, that she hadn't known what to do. That wasn't what Emma needed. She needed something more than empty words. She needed her mother to take responsibility, to truly understand the years of pain and silence that had shaped Emma's life. But that wasn't something Clara was capable of, Emma knew. It was a hard truth, but it was one she had to face. Slowly, Emma pushed herself off the wall and began to walk toward the parking lot. The sound of her footsteps echoed in the night, a steady rhythm that felt strangely comforting. She wasn't sure where she was going, only that she needed to keep moving. She couldn't stay here, not after everything that had happened, not after everything she had said. As she reached the car, she paused for a moment, looking up at the stars in the dark sky. There was something freeing about it. Something about the vastness of the universe that made her realize how small and insignificant everything else seemed. Her father's death, her mother's silence, the years of abuse, they didn't matter anymore. She had broken free. The chains were gone, and for the first time in her life, she felt like she could breathe. Emma took a deep breath, closed her eyes for a moment, and then opened the door to the car. She wasn't sure where life would take her from here, but she knew one thing. She would never be the same. She had reclaimed her voice, her power, and nothing could take that away from her. The days that followed the ceremony were quiet. Emma didn't speak to her mother for a while. She needed space to breathe, to think, to process everything that had happened. The truth had been spoken, but there was still a void. She found herself spending more time in the small apartment she had moved into after her father's death. It was a place she had never thought would feel like home, but somehow, it was starting to. The walls didn't echo with the ghosts of her past anymore. There was a peaceful stillness that was almost comforting. She would sit by the window, watching the world outside as the days passed by, feeling the weight of the years lift off her shoulders. It wasn't an instant healing. There were moments when the memories would rush back. The times her father's anger had consumed him, the way her mother had always chosen silence over confrontation. But with each passing day, those memories felt a little less sharp. Her phone would ring sometimes, but she wouldn't pick up. It was always Clara, leaving messages that ranged from apologetic to pleading. Emma would listen to them, but never respond. She wasn't ready for those conversations. Not yet. She wasn't sure she ever would be. One afternoon, as Emma sat on the couch reading, her phone buzzed with a message. It was from her friend, Kate, someone Emma hadn't seen in years. They had lost touch when Emma's life had become consumed by the darkness of her father's abuse. But Kate had always been there for her in the past. Emma stared at the message for a moment, unsure. But then she typed a reply, feeling the weight of her decision. "It's been a while, Kate. I'm doing okay, I think." The reply came almost instantly. "I've missed you. We should catch up sometime." Emma smiled softly at the message. For the first time in a long while, she felt like maybe, just maybe, There was a future beyond the pain. A future where she could reconnect with the parts of herself she had left behind. That evening, Emma sat on her balcony, the cool breeze brushing against her face as she looked out at the city. It was a quiet moment, but it felt like the beginning of something new. She was no longer the person she had been, the one who had lived in fear and silence. She was someone different now, someone stronger. And for the first time in a long time, Emma allowed herself to feel a sense of hope. There was still a long road ahead, but she knew she wasn't alone anymore. She was learning how to stand on her own, how to build a life without the weight of her past holding her down. It wasn't going to be easy, but she was ready for whatever came next. She wasn't afraid anymore. The days continued to pass by, and with each one, Emma felt herself becoming more and more aware of how far she had come. It was like the weight of a lifetime of silent suffering was finally starting to lift, piece by piece. Still, there were moments when she would look at the phone, her finger hovering over the screen, wondering whether it was time to call her mother back. Clara had left message after message, pleading with Emma to come home, to talk, to reconcile. Each time Emma listened to those messages, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing, that they were words spoken out of guilt, not understanding. Clara wanted forgiveness, but Emma wasn't sure she was ready to give it. Not yet. It wasn't that Emma didn't want her mother in her life. She longed for the connection they once shared. But the years of silence, the years of turning a blind eye to her pain, had built walls that Emma wasn't sure could be torn down. For the first time in her life, Emma was choosing herself. She wasn't going to let guilt or family obligations dictate her happiness anymore. That realization hit her as she sat at the kitchen table, sipping coffee one morning, staring out the window at the world she had barely begun to explore. Her thoughts were interrupted by a knock on the door. Emma froze for a moment, her heart rate quickening. She wasn't expecting anyone, and the last person she expected to see standing there was Clara. The door opened slowly, and there stood her mother, looking older, more fragile than Emma had ever remembered. Her eyes were red from crying, her hands trembling slightly as she clutched a small, weathered photo album. "I just wanted to talk," Clara said, her voice soft, tentative. Emma looked at her mother for a long moment, unsure of what to say, unsure if she even wanted to hear what Clara had to say. But something in her mother's eyes, the vulnerability there, made Emma pause. "Come in," Emma said quietly, stepping aside to let her mother enter. Clara walked in slowly, as if unsure of how to navigate the space that had once been so familiar to both of them. She sat down at the table, placing the photo album between them. "I know I haven't been the mother you needed me to be," Clara began, her voice thick with emotion. "And I'm sorry. I've carried that guilt with me for years, Emma." Emma remained silent, her eyes fixed on her mother, listening. "I wish I could go back and do things differently. I wish I had protected you. I wish I had seen the signs, but I didn't. And for that, I am so sorry." The words hung in the air, heavy and sincere. Clara reached across the table, her hand trembling as she touched Emma's. "Please, Emma, I know I can't change the past, but I want to be a better mother to you now. I want to make up for all the years I was absent, all the years I wasn't there when you needed me the most." Emma looked at her mother's hand, then back at her face. She could see the years of regret etched in her mother's expression. She could hear the sincerity in her voice. But a part of Emma still felt hesitant. Was it enough? Was it too little, too late? "I don't know if I can forgive you right now, Mom," Emma said softly, her voice shaking slightly. "But I'm willing to try. I'm willing to rebuild what we had, if you're willing to do the work too." Clara's face softened, and she nodded. "I'll do whatever it takes." Emma felt a strange warmth spread through her chest. It wasn't the instant forgiveness she had expected, but it was a step, a small, hesitant step toward healing. She wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, Emma felt like there was a chance, just a chance, that things could get better. Slowly, they both began to open the photo album, each picture a reminder of the family they had once been. But Emma knew, deep down, that the road ahead wouldn't be easy. It would take time, patience, and a lot of work. But for the first time in years, she felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe they could heal, together. Weeks passed since the conversation with Clara, and Emma could feel a shift within herself. The tension that had built up in her for so many years was starting to release, slowly but steadily. She had never imagined that reconnecting with her mother would be this difficult, but there was a part of her that couldn't help but want to try. Her mother had changed, and so had she. The past wasn't something that could be erased, but it was something they could start to move past. The more they spent time together, the more Emma began to see glimpses of the woman she once knew. Before all the pain, before the silence. One afternoon, they sat in Emma's small living room, talking about life, about memories long buried under years of hurt. Emma realized how much she had missed these simple conversations, the ones she used to take for granted. But there were still days when Emma's past would creep back in, like an old friend she couldn't shake. Her thoughts would wander to the years of neglect, the way her father had ruled their home with fear, the way her mother had chosen to stay silent. It was hard to forget, but Emma wasn't the same person anymore. She had built walls to protect herself, but now, little by little, she was starting to tear them down. Clara had a way of making things feel lighter, of offering small moments of kindness, and Emma found herself softening. There were still moments of hesitation, a fear that things might fall apart again. But with each conversation, with each shared laugh, Emma began to feel a sense of hope. One evening, as they were sitting together on the porch, watching the sun set over the horizon, Clara turned to Emma, her voice quieter than usual. "I'm so proud of you, you know," she said. Emma looked at her mother, surprised. "For what?" she asked, her voice filled with curiosity. Clara smiled softly, the lines on her face deepening with years of life lived. "For making it through everything. For finding your way out of the darkness. You're stronger than I ever gave you credit for." Emma's chest tightened at her mother's words, a lump forming in her throat. She had spent so many years feeling invisible, unimportant, but hearing those words from Clara made something shift inside her. "I didn't do it alone," Emma said, her voice thick with emotion. "But you're right, I've come a long way." Clara's gaze softened, and she reached out to take Emma's hand. "I know I wasn't the mother you needed, but I'm here now. I'm here for you, no matter what." Emma squeezed her mother's hand, her heart swelling with a mix of emotions she couldn't quite explain. There was still work to be done, still healing to take place, but for the first time, Emma felt like she wasn't carrying the burden of her past alone anymore. And that, she realized, was the beginning of something new. A new chapter, one that wasn't defined by pain, but by possibility. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, Emma felt like she had the strength to face it. The weight of her past no longer controlled her. She was free, and that freedom, she knew, was only the beginning. Emma sat in the park, the sunlight filtering through the trees, casting dappled shadows on the ground. It was a quiet afternoon, the kind where everything felt peaceful, and for once, Emma felt at ease. It had been a few months since she and Clara had started rebuilding their relationship, and although there were still moments of doubt, Emma knew she was moving in the right direction. She had learned to let go of the anger, the resentment, and even the fear that had defined so much of her life. It hadn't been easy. There were days when the memories would come rushing back, the pain of the past threatening to resurface, but Emma was stronger now. She had learned to confront it, to acknowledge it, and then to push it aside. She was no longer defined by the things that had happened to her. Clara had changed too. They had spent hours talking, sharing their feelings. And for the first time in years, Emma had felt heard. Her mother, though imperfect, was doing her best to make up for the years of silence. And Emma was learning to trust again, something she never thought possible. There were still moments of hesitation, moments when Emma wondered if it was too late for some things to be fixed, but those doubts were becoming fewer. It was a strange feeling, to have the possibility of a future with her mother, something she had once thought was out of reach. Emma's thoughts were interrupted by a soft voice calling her name. She looked up and saw Kate walking toward her, her smile warm and genuine. Kate had been a constant presence in Emma's life, even when Emma had pushed everyone away. She had always been there, quietly supportive, offering her friendship without expectation. Kate sat down beside Emma, and the two of them just sat there for a while, watching the people in the park, enjoying the calm of the afternoon. "How are you, really?" Kate asked, breaking the silence. Emma glanced at her, a small smile tugging at her lips. "I'm good. Better than I've been in a long time," she said, her voice steady. "I'm not perfect, but I'm okay." Kate nodded, her expression softening. "I'm proud of you, Emma. You've come so far." Emma looked down at her hands, the weight of Kate's words settling in her chest. She had come a long way. But the journey wasn't over. There would always be challenges, always be moments of doubt, but Emma felt ready to face them. She was no longer the scared little girl she once was. She was someone different now, stronger, wiser, and more resilient than she had ever been before. The road ahead wasn't clear, and Emma knew there would be more work to do. But for the first time, she felt like she was on the right path. A path that was hers to choose, free from the constraints of her past. And with that, for the first time in years, Emma allowed herself to feel the weight of her own freedom, a freedom she had fought so hard to reclaim.